Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Perry Mason. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, we have our first day in court, and obviously, things didn't go the way Perry wanted them to. Obviously, it's like he knew what he wanted to say, he just couldn't say it. I mean, it's kind of a messy situation, especially because the DA kind of would Perry even talked about the fact that the DA went on for like 2 hours, kind of breaking everything down. They haven't even necessarily gotten to the trial part, so it's still that pre-trial, opening statements type of situation. But now it's a situation of like, okay, we got to find some kind of connection between all of this because, where things currently stand, it's like how our three kidnappers even knew each other. It's like there seems like there is no connection, so they got to figure out what connects them all, how this all connects to Ennis as well. It was almost interesting because there's just a little bit of the episode where it seems like Pete almost resents Perry because he's like, oh yeah, with your new career and everything, and Perry's like, what's that about? He's like, you know what it means. He's like, no, what does that mean? I interpret that, I guess it's for Pete, it's like we've been kind of partners prior to now. Now puts you in a position like, oh, now you're in this higher paying job and, you're going to forget the friends that kind of got you to where you are. And I guess it's also the thing of like I said, we were partners. Now it's going to be a thing of you're technically my bossing me around, because obviously I don't think he really cared too much about EB being partly behind, doing that. So now probably even more so it being Perry the one kind of doing that, which, I mean, you could make the argument Perry kind of barked orders a little bit before, while they were both, investigators. But I think it was more so just kind of like it was like a mutual, we're on the same level thing. Now it's the power dynamics a little different. That's how I interpret it, but I could be wrong. But the next day, though, Matthew's on the stand and the DA is getting him to read all the stuff of all the letters between George and Emily. And then Perry gets his chance, and I love Perry doing this thing. Like, he does a really good job of kind of pivoting a lot of it, ranging from like, because Matthew is talking all this stuff about Emily being a liar and stuff like that. But then, like, I love the fact that Perry's pointing out all his lies. It's like, you were actually gambling, weren't you? Where you said that you were, like, I think he said he was like at work or whatever. It's like, you were out gambling, so you lied not only to your wife, but even to the police. So it's basically a thing of like, almost like, who the hell are you to call Emily a liar when you've basically lied so much during this investigation as well? It's also because like, because you're saying that, because the whole concept behind this whole thing, it's like, she knew that your dad was Baggerly, that the whole George situation, that they knew that and they took advantage of this situation. It's like, your wife, you guys moved here 5 years ago. Did she ever know that Baggerly was your dad? And it's like, no. Why didn't you tell her? He's like, because she's my wife and she deserved to know. But that's the thing of like, now this puts in a position of like, so if she knew like that Baggerly was your dad, why would she strike sooner? The fact of the matter is she had no idea until this all came up that he was your dad. So it's supposed to kind of cut away from some of like the motive or, saying that like, she knew she could get a payday from Baggerly, but also it's like, so Baggerly is your father and he's paid away your gambling debts, this and that. Like, the fact of the matter is you are only in jail for like a day or so because your dad hired a fancy lawyer to get you out. So it's a situation of your daddy's here kind of cleaning up a lot of your messes. And so it's just kind of like he's saying in the long run, you actually seem like you have benefited more from this Charlie situation than anyone else, And obviously then Matthew's calling Emily a whore and hopes she hangs for this because he's starting to say like, what if Charlie's not even mine? Charlie's, he's starting to think like maybe Charlie might be, Cannon's, or, probably he might associate with, maybe it's someone else. She's a liar. She's this and that. And it's just kind of like, once again, it's like, I find that so effed up to believe because obviously it's your wife, so it's a little different, but I'm like, it's not like your dad has been the greatest person either, yet you take his side in all of this. It's like, you can make the argument, that the whole thing about like, he's supposed to be like a Christian and stuff like that, or like, he, got, saved and stuff like that, and just talking about Emily in that way. But I mean, I guess regardless, it's just interesting the hypocrisy behind it. And all you can see is Baggerly looking over there like, because even Della was saying like during the like trial, like some of the like jurors are kind of staring at Emily because she's fidgeting a lot and stuff like that. So to them, it just makes it seem like she's even more guilty. So things kind of looked better for them in that sense. But things kind of take a turn for the worse when the dude who like is the manager at a hotel basically confirmed that Emily and George were banging while Charlie was in the next room, and it does not look, and that makes it look bad because like Perry goes off on her like back at the house because he's like, you should have told me. This way I could be prepared for these fucking things. The fact of the matter is now this makes it seem like if you were okay with like you and George like banging it out while your child, because she's like, no, the door wasn't closed, that's a lie and stuff like that. I mean, the only reason why he knows all these details, I mean, because he left it out in his story, but he was a peeping Tom, but you know, that's neither here nor there. It would at least in the confines of the courtroom and stuff like that. But it's just kind of like, oh, what kind of parent would do that? It's like, I mean, to be fair, this is back in the day, so who knows? But at the same time, you're like, sadly, that's probably. I'm not saying it's such an interesting thing because I'm not going to judge someone for doing that. It's because it's like, oh, you get your rocks off. I get it. It's a complicated thing because it's like, oh, it's showing you being irresponsible as a parent, but also it's like you got needs of your own. So it's like it's a complicated thing. Like I don't think it's as morally black and white as it kind of gets painted as Emily, but it's like more so than anything, it's showing the fact is if you're willing to do that, then maybe you're willing to do everything else in this case as well. And obviously the whole thing ends up frustrating him, Perry, just because he's like, because they've kind of got no moves to make and he doesn't know what to do next, and it's just the whole thing's frustrating because they bring up some, because Pete has been doing some investigating and they, because there's also like stuff that the DA has kind of kept from them. This whole situation with this dude, like, oh, we sent it over to him. It's like, no, we didn't get any information we didn't get a file on this dude. It's like, fine. The judge is like, going forward, you better, pass over everything because I'm not about to have this be an issue in my courtroom, yada, 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 so on and so forth, And so it also turns into this thing of like, yeah, they've been gathering up info, kind of things connecting Enos as well as the others, working on that angle, but at the same time, Pete's like, you have some stuff that you can use. You still have the whole, Paul Drake situation. It's like, bring it up in court, but obviously for Perry, it's like, I gave him my word, I can't go back on my word and bring it up in court. It's like, yes, because if you don't, Emily is getting the rough end of this. Things will get much worse if you don't bring him up. And so obviously Drake is on the stand, the DA asks his question, and it's Perry's time, and Perry kind of starts insinuating a lot of the evidence not being what it says, because it's like, oh, you said the blood trail went this long, and it's like, oh, it's from over here, from me all the way over here to you, and it's just kind of like, oh, there's no picture of the blood, like, he's positioning things to be in a position where he can bring up the dentures, but he doesn't. Because he feels bad, because he knows that he brings that up, it's just going to look bad, it's going to screw Drake over. And even talking to Lupe, she's like, will they kill him? It's like, they could, but Lupe's like, yes, could is one thing, but will is another. Like, he is a cop, but that's also the thing of like, he's also a black cop, so like, that could be something that probably wouldn't get the attention. Obviously it would if he was white or whatever, like, but, so that puts Perry in this complicated position, so that's why he chose not to do it. He couldn't, because he knew what this would mean for Drake. And I thought it was so interesting that Drake actually comes to him later on and is like, hey, I actually was kind of hoping that you would force me to kind of say, because he was like, if you made me tell the truth, then I can have someone to blame. I could blame you, have all my hatred towards you, like, you put me in this position, but you didn't. But because for Perry, it's like, I gave you my word, and he didn't like Drake being in this position. But like, obviously Drake earlier on in the episode got paid off by his commanding officer. It's like, oh, we heard about the great stuff you did on the stand, so obviously he doesn't even feel like being home right now because of all of this. And it's just like, he feels bad because he wants to help Emily, because he knows that Emily's being railroaded. The police are skewing this investigation and stuff like that. So for him, he wants to do the right thing. But for him, and I like this conversation because it's like, do you know what it's like to be scared? Which obviously Perry's like, I was in the war, I know. But obviously for Drake, it's different, because for him, it's like, as a black man, it's like, I'm not even in a position to arrest white people. The fact of the matter is, like, no black person gets partnered up even with a white person. The fact of the matter is, it's a situation that when it's all said and done, like, he's in a position where he's always afraid of kind of like, what if one day just becomes too much and he basically explodes and it causes so much fallout because of it, you know? And obviously Perry's like, yeah, that's a type of fear I could never understand. But for him, it's like he ends up putting the dentures in a evidence thing envelope and putting it in a box, kind of making it seem like, oh, it was there amongst the evidence that the DA gave, which Perry's like, the fact of the matter is, you know, that's super illegal. He's like, yes, but it's a way of working towards buying back a little bit more of my soul, you know, for what he's, you know, his part to play in all this. Because the sad thing is, even like Pete was like, oh, I've got no sympathy for him because he turned a blind eye to this, making him just as complicit in railroading, you know, Emily in this whole situation. So I should actually talk about it. Alice had this interesting conversation with Perry after he kind of blew up at Emily about the whole like hotel motel like situation of like her and George having sex like right across the room from like in a different room from Charlie and everything. But nevertheless, it is a situation of like, she brings up like she didn't say anything because she was embarrassed. Like, haven't you done things that you kind of regret and you're embarrassed? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, and he's like, have you? And she's like, of course. You know, because for her, it's like, because for Perry, it's like, you're not what I thought you'd be. And she's like, why? Because she's like, you basically had this like very Joan of Arc look at thought and process of like who you thought I would be. And it's basically like, yeah, because Sister Alice isn't, you know, isn't necessarily the typical picture of someone in her position to be, you know. So but he said something interesting where it's basically like her being there actually hurts Emily's case more than anything, because obviously you being there is more of a distraction because it brings all the debate of like, oh, all that you said about bringing Charlie back from the dead, all that, and you know, so it just kind of adds a little bit more of a stain to an already complicated case. Even later on, her mom is saying we need to run because the fact of the matter is there's so many people waiting for your miracle and stuff like that. So it's like we need to run. But obviously for Alice, it's like this church, everything that church touches is hers. And so for her, it's like, you want to run, you can do that, but I'm not going to. So obviously her mom's concerned about it, but it's because that's the whole thing of her being like, oh, she's going to bring back Charlie and everything, because she ended up getting permission because Emily ended up giving it to her. Didn't need Matthew's signature because he basically denounced Charlie as his under oath in the courtroom. So, but it's like the entire time you're like, it's not going to go the way Alice thinks it is. I'm curious to see where that whole thing goes, like what that ends up becoming, because I'm just like, that is like part of me. I was about to say, like, not, because part of me was wondering, not unless we end up finding out that Charlie is actually still alive, that's not actually Charlie, that's a different baby made to look like. That's what I'm saying, like, not unless they got some, well, no, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. It seems like that is straight up Charlie, so why wouldn't a mother or father really know their child, you know? So that's why I was just wondering, if that was going to lend itself to, like, a twist with Alice's whole proclamation, but then I'm like, probably not. It probably is just going to be a thing of, like, she's going to be, like, everyone that believed in her is going to turn against her. It's so sad too, because like obviously like in the courtroom, the lady that's supposed to be kind of like the guard that's supposed to have watched Emily, but she kind of stood on the sideline when the cops were kind of roughing Emily up. She gets on the stand. She's the new call by the DA, and she basically lies on the stand saying, like, she takes some of the conversation that Emily and Alice had, and then she twists the truth to be like, oh yeah, she confessed to like, oh, she's the one that smothered her baby and with a pillow, and then also sewed her eyes shut, which we as the audience know that's total BS. And obviously Emily trying to defend herself by being like, no, that's not the case, that's not what happened, so on and so forth. Because that was after like the blow of like the fact that Perry tried to get the dentures into evidence, suggesting that there was someone else involved, that George didn't kill himself, he was murdered, that there's something more to all of this. But obviously the judge wouldn't let it fly. And obviously for Perry, it's just frustrating because it's like everything is literally stacked against him. It's like the perception of the case, what the DA's up to. I mean, because even the DA had that thing where he was talking to Ennis and trying to get like his, because it's like a lot of stuff kind of got brought up about like how and when he got to the investigation when he did. The fact of the matter is he paid off another cop so that someone else could get head start on the invest. Like, it's just like, it looks a little suspicious and weird. Then Holcomb ends up questioning him about it later on, and I think this is the most interesting thing. No honor amongst thieves, right? They have their little racket and stuff like that. We do some shady shit, but for him, it's like you've crossed the line. And that's the thing of like we're kind of criminal cops ourselves. You cross on a whole nother lane because you're involved in all of this. Because then he's like the fact that because like he's trying to twist the BS that he gave Pete. Ennis is trying to do that to Holcomb, give him that spill about like, oh yeah, like this case, it could be great for you and great for me. He's like, no, the fact of the matter is you did all this stuff without telling me, your partner. So what about your family? What about me? The fact of the matter is how this could look on all of them, you being neck deep in all of this. Like the fact of the matter for him, it's like I got hired for a job that just went kind of wrong, and it's just kind of, and then he's like asking like, are you the one that did that to Charlie? So it's like it's so interesting, because even criminals have their own moral compass. There's a line even for them, which is ironic in certain regards, but I guess it's like, yeah, we might do some shady stuff from time to time, but nothing to this extreme leading to a kid being killed. And it's like also it's a situation like this was my partner that was involved, so it's like, does anyone else have some key part to all of this? And obviously we know it's Drake does, so it's like, Holcomb is like, whoever it is needs to die. So Drake already sent his wife away because he wants to do right by Emily and he wants to help with all this, but he doesn't want Claire to get caught up in all of this either, so he sends her and the baby away. So part of me is just like, oh, that's not going to end well, is it? So that's what I hope it doesn't turn down that route, but with everything kind of being set up the way it is, it just heavily implies like it is going to be all that. And obviously the sad thing too with all of this is the fact is that Emily ends up, saying like at the end of the day it's fine, they can say whatever they want, all the people can say and believe whatever they want. When Sister Alice brings Charlie back, it's like it'll be fine because you can't be murdered if he's brought back to life. It's like she's so broken, she's holding out for hope in any shape or form. If this also meant bringing her baby back, that's a thing too. Like I think that's the most important thing to her, but I think she is kind of broken a little bit and kind of because she's kind of desperate for anything, to kind of make this all right, because she's kind of alone. The only people in her corner are Pete, Della, and Perry. Other than that, she doesn't really have anyone else in her corner. All the while, like, you have Pete doing some investigating. Obviously, Della kind of diving into like the books and stuff like that, because it turns out like there was money that that Gannon was, that George was embezzling from the church, and he was basically sending the money to his address because there's like this fake company and stuff like that. And Della ends up finding out that the fake company has like association with Baggerly, so it does seem like he is neck deep in all of this. So it's like, I mean, that's the biggest question, like what, like, because obviously that was a big part of this too. It's like we're all at this point in time just trying to prove Emily's innocence, keep her alive, but it's still the big question of like, well, what about, who is this other person involved in Charlie's death, and like what was this all about? I mean, it was about the money and stuff like that, but once again, Ennis was like, I was hired, so it's not like they came up with this alone. Like they're playing out someone else's plan. It's like, for what purposes, we don't know. There's like still a lot of unknown factors, and obviously Della ends up kind of taking some of the stuff, because we find out like Pete was talking to that lady, and I love that lady kind of being very foul-mouthed, and Pete really liking it and stuff. But it turns out that dude who Della and Perry was talking to early in this episode, who's connected to the church, helping them look through the books and stuff like that. This is all connected to that J.H., his name, what was it, Jim Hick, and the company that's got, Baggerly's name on it and stuff like that, where he sits on it apparently like as a chair or whatever. Because this is also tied into that thing that he was building that he brought up to Matthew a couple episodes ago. So there's a lot on that front. Once again, circling back to what I was saying, like Perry is kind of stressing and flipping out, because like obviously it's like all of this kind of got left to him, because he's almost like, what am I supposed to do? Because he's like mimicking like what EB would be saying, but for him it's like the fact of the matter is you killed yourself, and you left, like you should be the one doing this, but you killed yourself and you kind of left this all on us, But he goes out there and runs in the gym, and Jim's like, oh, I know exactly who you are. You're Emily's lawyer. I was kind of waiting for you to find me. I'm like, oh, okay. I guess he wants to kind of, whatever this truth of the matter is, I think he knows some part of this that he wants to see it come to light as well. So whatever the case may be, a lot of interesting stuff went down in this episode. I'm curious to ultimately see where all of this takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good